The shadows of dawning ridge. The heat pressed against Simon's back as he sat on the wooden floor, his body shaking slightly. The room felt empty, but the smell of smoke lingered from the fire he had left smoldering in the fireplace. He let out a slow, shaky breath, eyes red from tears that he hadn't allowed to fall until now. His suit was soaked from the storm he had run through, the dark fabric clinging uncomfortably to his skin. The pile of ash and half-burned cigarette stubs on the hearth were the only indication of how long he had been sitting there. But time didn't seem to matter. Graduation had been nothing like Simon had imagined. For years of struggle and sacrifice, and the only face he wanted to see in the crowd wasn't there. The celebrations had been pointless. Family and friends gathered to cheer for an achievement that no longer felt like an achievement. And still Simon had worn the smile, played the part, all while his mind wandered to a place miles away, to someone who hadn't come. Johnny had been the one to pull Simon back from the edge so many times. They had met years ago, in the quiet hills of Dawning Ridge, far from the small town that had shaped Simon's life. What began as a friendship had quickly deepened into something more. Something that had given Simon hope when everything else seemed to crumble. But Johnny had his own demons, his own reasons for staying hidden, and Simon had never pushed him to make a decision about their future. Now, as Simon sat in the suffocating silence of his father's house, his mind raced back to those moments with Johnny. He had left a ticket on Johnny's doorstep that morning, hoping, wishing that he would come. But he hadn't. Not today, not ever. The front door creaked open behind him, and Simon didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He could hear the familiar footsteps, the gentle rustle of soaked clothing as Johnny entered the room, his presence as steady as it had always been. "Mind if I sit?" Johnny's voice was soft, cutting through the silence but not shattering it. Simon swallowed hard, wiping the back of his hand across his face, but the tears kept coming. He didn't answer, but Johnny sat beside him anyway, close enough for their shoulders to brush. "I thought you'd be at the party," Johnny said quietly, his eyes flickering to the pile of cigarettes on the hearth. "I couldn't stay," Simon muttered. He glanced at Johnny's face, noting the soaked shirt and suit jacket clinging to his frame. "Why are you here?" Johnny didn't answer right away. He took one of Simon's cigarettes from the pack, lighting it with steady hands, then took a slow drag before passing it back. His gaze was calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made Simon's chest tighten. "I couldn't stay away either," Johnny finally said, voice low. "Not tonight." Simon's breath hitched, and he pressed his palms against his knees, trying to keep the tremble in his voice from showing. "You didn't come to the ceremony," he said, trying to sound casual, but the hurt was evident. Johnny looked away, his lips tightening into a thin line. "I was there," he said softly, exhaling smoke into the thick air. "I just couldn't bring myself to watch from the crowd." The words hit Simon like a punch. He turned to face Johnny, searching his face for answers he wasn't sure he wanted. "Why?" was all he managed to say. Johnny's eyes flickered up, meeting Simon's gaze with a mixture of sorrow and something that looked like regret. "Because I didn't know how to be part of that world. Your world. I don't belong there, Simon, not the way you do." Simon's heart clenched. "You belong with me," he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Johnny's hand found Simon's, his fingers curling around Simon's wrist, warm and steady. "I know," Johnny whispered, his voice raw, "but I didn't think you still wanted me here." Simon closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek as Johnny's touch grounded him. "I never stopped wanting you," Simon confessed, his voice barely audible. "Not once." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, the soft pattering on the roof the only sound breaking the stillness. Simon leaned into Johnny, letting himself feel the warmth of his presence, the comfort he had been yearning for since the day they had met. "I'm tired of doing this alone," Simon whispered, his breath shaky. "I don't want to fight this on my own anymore." Johnny's grip tightened around Simon's hand, and Simon felt the shift in him, a quiet resolve. "You don't have to," Johnny said firmly. "I'll stay." Simon opened his eyes, meeting Johnny's gaze with a vulnerability he had been too scared to show before. "For how long?" Johnny's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "As long as you need me." The weight of those words settled over Simon, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel crushed by it. He took a deep breath, leaning his head against Johnny's shoulder as the last of the tension drained from his body. Maybe he had lost the perfect picture of what his life was supposed to be. Maybe his world wasn't as clear-cut as he had imagined. But here in this quiet moment with Johnny at his side, Simon knew he wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough. The warmth of Johnny's presence eased the cold that had gripped Simon for so long. As they sat there shoulder to shoulder, the world outside the little house seemed to shrink, leaving just the two of them. The storm had quieted, and the night grew still, save for the soft crackling of the dying fire. Simon lifted his head from Johnny's shoulder, staring at the firelight playing on the walls. "I don't know how to face tomorrow," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's different now. I don't have a plan. I thought I'd feel more complete after graduating, but it's like I've lost more than I've gained." Johnny didn't rush to fill the silence. He took a slow drag from the cigarette before stubbing it out and turned slightly to face Simon. "Plans are overrated," Johnny said quietly, his thumb tracing small circles on Simon's knuckles. "You don't have to know what's next right now. The fact that you're still standing after everything, that's enough for today." Simon huffed a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Barely standing," he murmured, but Johnny's calmness grounded him, softened the sharp edges of his thoughts. "There's no rush," Johnny said. "We figure it out as we go. Together." That word, together, lingered in the air between them, a balm to the wound Simon hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For so long he'd felt like it was him against the world, always bracing for the next blow, the next disappointment. But with Johnny here, the weight of that burden seemed lighter, more manageable. Simon glanced sideways at Johnny, seeing the quiet resolve in his face. The uncertainty that had plagued Simon's heart for years began to loosen its hold. He might not have all the answers, and his future might be full of unknowns, but for the first time that didn't terrify him. Johnny was here with him, and somehow that made all the difference. "What about your family?" Simon asked, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "You said you'd leave this summer. I don't want to be the reason you stay behind if..." Johnny cut him off, his grip tightening just slightly on Simon's hand. "My family has expectations for me, yeah. They always have. But I'm not living my life for them anymore." "Not when..." Johnny hesitated, searching for the right words. "Not when I've found something I actually want for myself." Simon's heart thudded in his chest at Johnny's words. "And you're sure?" he asked, needing to hear it again, needing reassurance. Johnny turned fully toward him, eyes steady and sure. "I'm sure, Simon. I choose you." Simon's breath caught, the weight of those words hitting him with full force. After years of feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, that he was always running from something, those simple words felt like home. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly as the tears that had been threatening to fall finally did. But this time they weren't from grief or despair. They were from the quiet hope that maybe he didn't have to do this alone after all. Maybe for the first time in a long time, he could let himself believe in something good. Simon wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, feeling a small, hesitant smile tug at the corners of his lips. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered. Johnny's lips quirked into a soft, playful grin. "You didn't have to do anything. Just Be you. And with that, the last of Simon's walls crumbled. He leaned into Johnny, closing his eyes, feeling the warmth and safety of his presence. Together they sat in the quiet, letting the fire burn low, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it hand in hand. For now that was enough.